Okay, so hello, welcome to the How to Understand Annotation Inference and Purpose lesson. So for today's lesson, we are covering the following. We are looking at what is annotation, why annotation, how to annotate. We are also looking at recapping what is inference type questions, what is purpose questions. And for this lesson, you will need the following. You'll need your social studies textbook, as well as this set of notes, which is 1A. Now, if you have your 1A worksheet, all right, do turn to page 7 because on page 7, you can actually see specifically how to interpret sources in social studies. So we are looking at annotating, all right, the 5 W's and 1 H. We are also looking at specifically looking at gradients of inference. Okay, what are simple inference, what are messaged, what is inference with perspective, as well as we are looking at contextualizing, all right, purpose, motives, as well as agenda. And moving on along the year, we will be looking at comparison as well as cross-referencing skills. Now, on page 8 of your worksheet, there is a guide for annotation. And you can see that the guide is actually based on a certain frame. Okay, what you see from the source, what you think about the source, and what you wonder. It is not really necessary to have a specific green pen or red pen or purple pen, but it is good to remain consistent. So for any lesson or any teacher that is teaching you annotation, take note of what is the norm of the teacher. So specifically for me, I would like to use green pen for provenance. Okay, and when I mean by provenance, it is really that particular line or information before a source. Later on, we'll take a look at it. So when we talk about provenance, we talk about who's the author, when is it created, where, and for whom. And then for the basic content or the source unpacking, I would like to use a red pen. And looking at the type of source, is there any language symbolic things that we are looking at? Things like images, punctuation, exaggeration. Sometimes it's even the tone of the source. And whose perspective is it? Contextualization will come for specific questions like purpose, and it is important for us to look at all the sources holistically. So we are looking at what is the big picture. We are looking at, for example, the viewpoint of the writer or the cartoonist. And most of this particular information that we need for contextualization will come in the background information. And later on, when you learn about cross-referencing, we will learn about corroboration. What other information will you need to understand the source, and how does it make an impact? What's the consequence? Now, in annotation, okay, when unpacking source-based question, we annotate so that we can zoom into important keywords, information, time frame, or even timeline, the author, the creator of the source, and knowing if the source supports a particular statement or stand. We underline or highlight because visually we know which are the important points, so we don't end up rereading, because in a national exam you do only have 10 minutes to annotate and read all sources. Now, methods of annotation, it is not new and it is applied across subjects. So these are just some of the samples that can be found online, okay? Some would circle important words, they'll put an asterisk or a star, or an exclamation mark, you know, there's numbering, there's question marks if, let's say, for example, you're not sure, additional information. So it is very important to perhaps have your own understanding or follow what your teacher actually would recommend. Okay, and I would say that annotation is really across all other subjects. Now, my personal preference is definitely the 5W1H. It's just much easier because especially when we look at certain sources, you would really need to know who is the creator or the author, when was it written, and why, the reason behind it. So I'll give you a sample of this, and you can turn to page 10 to 11 of your textbook. There is an example of a source-based question, and you can see from the top here, this is what we call our big question, or our question that guides all the sources. Should female Singapore citizens and permanent residents serve national service? And it had signposts for you, the background information. So that means there's a reason why they give you this information and why it's compulsory to read it, so that you have an understanding when you look at source A, B, C, and D. So this is how I annotate. Okay, I use very simple, I just use two colors, red as well as green. So I sort of bracket the big question. I put a star for background information, and the reason why I put a star for background information is so that I remember, and I would highlight facts. So yellow highlighter or highlight is actually just facts, whereas the keyword here in the background information is actually the however. You know, things like in addition, however, thus, but. Okay, these are things that are important because it does change the narrative of the background information. And then you can see the blue is actually related to the big question. So anything that I highlight in blue here is specifically about the question itself. And then you can see that this is what I mean by provenance, the from an article published in Today. So I have my what, I have my when. I also identified my audience, which is Singaporeans here. And I highlight about the question itself, which is, should female citizens of the R serve national service? And I put that yes at the corner here, I put that no here, yes here. It's because I want to answer the big question so that I don't spend time rereading again. Okay, and sometimes I put a little black note here, or something that is written in black, because that is sort of important that I wanted to remember, because some sources are interlinked. So you can see source A, which is on 27 August, and source B, which is on 30th August. So you can see that source B is a response to the article published. So when later on certain skills, when we do comparison, these are important things to highlight. All right, so take note of how we annotate. So this is basically how, as a teacher, I would do. So it is highly important and highly compulsory for you to actually annotate your sources. Now, moving on. Going back to, again, worksheet 1A, we look at gradients of inference. You look at page 9 and 10, and on page 9 is actually just an unpacking of what it means by gradient of inference, whether it's simple inference, message, inference with perspective, or purpose. So these are the type of gradients of inference and how it can be worded. At the same time, on page 10, it is actually just a simple or basic scaffold, right? Some of us may have trouble in writing out the particular answers. So these are what we call writing guide or sentence starters. Now, again, all right, so take a look, okay? For simple inference, the question is just basic inference, what you can unpack from the source, whereas message is there is something that the intended, I would say the intended purpose of it, right? There's a clear message that the creator or the publisher of the source wants you to sort of unpack and see. Whereas inference with perspective is because they're asking you, do you this particular source agrees or approves or supports a certain statement. Whereas for purpose is always the reason behind why a particular source is published. Now, what is the meaning of inference or inferring a source? It is using what you already know and evidence from the text. And most important is about reading between the lines and figuring out what the creator or author is saying. In fact, inference is the most basic. You need to know that to move on to the other type of source-based question skills. All right, and sometimes inference is one of the hardest in the national exam actually. Okay, you cannot misinterpret. Now, I found this on the internet and I thought that really sums up everything. What's the meaning of inference is what you read, okay, what you know. That means you need to read the background information and putting everything together in your own words, I would say. Okay, so that is inference. So again, on page 10, it is really about the way of writing. All right, as you get the hang of doing source-based questions, sometimes you don't even need to have a scaffold. But a scaffold is important because at least there is a frame of writing. And sometimes all of us, in fact, actually, most of us would require a frame of writing. All right, so this will help you and guide you specifically for this year. So for the next few slides, we will be looking at these 3 skills, okay, and we are going to use one example, which is going to be shown in this lesson. Right, so again, we're looking at simple inference. So remember what I said, you must make sure you read the background information, and you can see that the background information is really about how SAF is harnessing technology because they want to enhance servicemen or NS-men safety. And you look at this, quite interesting cartoon. It is by a local Singaporean artist and is published online. All right, so obviously, and definitely the audience is Singaporeans, right? Okay, so what does the source tell you about Singapore Armed Forces, or what can you learn about Singapore Armed Forces? This would be how a simple inference question is worded. Okay, so you can see that, based on this, the source tells me that there is heavy reliance on technology. Why? Because even the tank, you can see it says here, iPad compatible via Bluetooth here. And the 2 soldiers, instead of perhaps navigating it manually, I would say, you have them controlling the tank via an iPad. Okay, a simple iPad device which can control a tank which is used in battle. So what does this suggest? It suggests that our Singapore Armed Forces harnessed leverages on technology in training of our soldiers. So based on this and based on understanding of the background information, this is simply how you would answer a simple inference question. Now moving on, if the question is asking what is the message of the cartoon? Okay, now this is where you need to insert a reason or a purposeful verb. Okay, so things like to inform, to convince Singaporeans, because you would identify the audience, that the use of technology is important or will help the training of soldiers. And of course, you can see that again, when we code, just like how we code simple inference, right? It would be the same because you're talking about the same source, right? So we can see that the tank is iPad compatible via Bluetooth, and the 2 soldiers controlling the tank via iPad. It shows that our Singapore Armed Forces harness or leverages technology for the benefit of the soldiers. Now, it can also be the message is sort of negative, okay, because the cartoonist could have drawn this to criticize SAF for using technology in the training of the soldiers, right? Because the 2 soldiers here are controlling the iPad via a very simple, of course, it's a very high technology use, but it's still an iPad. And you would expect the use of weapons to be a bit more advanced, right? However, it also shows that soldiers sort of lack the skills or the credibility. Why? Because you look at what this soldier who's holding the iPad is saying. I'm the champion of Angry Birds. And we all know that Angry Birds is actually a mobile, or started as a mobile game. So what does this suggest? It suggests that our Singapore Armed Forces may not have real battle skills because they're only battling using mobile game. if we are too over-reliant on technology, it may not be the best, even though in the background information, it does say that all this technology is to enhance servicemen's safety, because there are cases where, we have our NS men who gets injured during training, during mock combat. Now, if the question does the cartoonist support the use of technology in the army? So you can see that you need to make that stand. You need to say yes or no. So for this purpose, I would say that the cartoonist is actually mocking. All right, mocking means make fun, being sarcastic towards perhaps MINDEF or SAF. So for this, I would want to say that the cartoonist does not support the use of technology. He is actually criticizing. All right, and you can see it is the same argument when we are doing messaged, and it does show again that too reliance on technology may not be the best, especially when we are looking at the security of our country. Now, next is we are looking at purpose. So what's the difference between in simple inference, message, and inference with perspective? For purpose, we are looking at the context. So you can see that the way we write our sentence starters, right, there is this added dimension or added frame, okay, or added perspective where you need to look at context. There is a reason why that cartoon was actually published. Okay, now for purpose type questions, these are mostly how it is being worded. Now, what is important is the purpose verb. So using words such as to show, to tell is actually very superficial understanding. It's just like obviously, all right? But there is more in a cartoon. So write it such that, is it about to convince? Is it about to support? Is it about to criticize and to mock? I would say for Sec 3's, purpose verbs such as to convince, to support, to criticize, to mock would actually be quite sufficient. All right, and the added one, which is point 3 here, context, the reason why the source was published has connections to what is mentioned in the background information. So that's why I was telling you in the beginning of this video, always remember, read the background information, because that is where you find the clues. So if I were to give this particular source and I would word it as why was this cartoon published? It was published because the creator wanted to convince Singaporeans or SAF that using technology may not be the best for Singapore. So from the source, again, the source details and explanation is the same, right? So what is the context? In view of SAF harnessing technologies such as artificial intelligence and data analysis to enhance servicemen safety, and where do I get this information? I get this information from the background information here. Okay, the source was created so that Singaporeans, the audience, can give feedback to SAF to balance the use of technology, as well as to ensure our soldiers have sufficient experiences on the battlefield for the defense of our country. So you can see that it is actually about, yes, the cartoonist was mocking, but at the same time, the cartoonist would also want to have sort of a balance. I mean, I wouldn't want to have the champion of Angry Birds to navigate something that is used for war purposes or for defense purposes, right? So this is the one that in your answer, okay, in your practices, specifically for purpose, you need to remember this. Slightly different from lower sec, where the outcome is just clearly stated. You do not have to use any form of background information, and specifically, that it was related to history. But in social studies, we are looking at a little bit more. Would a student or a candidate in the national exam be able to identify that extra thing? And most of the time, it will come from background information, or it may even come from other sources. Okay, so I hope you understand specifically. I think the most important is how to answer purpose questions. And if, let's say, you're still unsure, or you are in doubt, always remember to approach your social studies teacher. So thank you very much. Okay, you can watch again this particular video and fast forward to the points that is relevant. All right, so see you in the next how to series. Bye-bye.